Welcome to On Health with Houston Methodist. I'm Katie McCallum, former researcher turned health writer, mostly writing for our blogs.
I'm Scott Crawford. I'm one of the videographers here at Houston Methodist.
Scott, I've got kind of a fun question for you. If you had to compare your diet today to your parents' diet at your current age, so when they were your age, on a scale of 1 to 10, how different would you say yours is today from theirs back then?
Got to be probably a 5 or a 6. It's pretty different.
Yeah. Okay. Next level of question. What about how different would you compare your diet today to your grandparents' diet?
That'd be the 7 to 8 range.
Okay. Next one. What about your diet today to prehistoric humans, caveman ages?
That's the 11.
Yeah, like some astronomical number different.
Yeah, it doesn't even resemble what they were eating in that time. They probably didn't even cook for the first several thousand years.
Yeah. I mean, I think of like people foraging for berries back in the day, and like we did that as kids because it was fun, but wouldn't even eat them, honestly. We'd come home with like a bunch of blackberries and be like, Mom, do something with these. We wouldn't even eat them.
They're covered in dirt and bugs. You can't eat that.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting to think about how significantly our diets have shifted over time, especially when you think about what the body kind of learned what to digest versus what, we're putting in it today.
Oh, yeah,
so
absolutely.
different.
Yeah, there's very little resemblance to what even in the past 100 years, what people were eating before. It's so processed. Habits around eating are completely different.
Yeah. I mean, I think even, the obvious offenders or things that are clearly very processed, you have like a Big Mac or something. You go to
Right.
McDonald's, you get, one of the most unhealthy meals you're going to have in the week sort of thing. I'm being dramatic. It's not that bad.
Could be better.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think on the other hand, the processed foods are sneaky in other ways. Like I think of peanut butter. Obviously a processed food because it's not just peanuts anymore, but like that was for the better, right? Like I'm glad we invented peanut butter.
Right.
Now it's like a spreadable peanut situation. Love peanuts, love spreading peanut butter on bread. But then you fast forward to today where peanut butter crackers, those are so processed. I mean, I'm sure it's peanut butter that's full of added sugar. The crackers are all refined carbs.
It's the peanut spread product. You can't even call it peanut butter.
Yeah, peanut spread product on a refined flour of some sort, kind of crusty bread item thing. Like these, we call them peanut butter crackers, but in reality, they're so different from the crackers our parents probably ate.
Right.
But yeah, I think it brings up an interesting sort of topic, and I'm glad we're talking about it today, where, our diets have significantly evolved, even from just our parents' time, not even going back to caveman days. So who do we talk to about this today?
Yeah, we talked to Dr. Archana Sadhu. She's one of the endocrinologists here at Houston Methodist. All right, Dr. Sadhu, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. So we're going to talk a little bit about diet today and how diet has evolved. I guess I'll just start with that. How do you think diets have changed over time for people? I know that fast food probably wasn't a big thing 100 or 200 years ago. So how do you think that's affecting things?
Well, I mean, if you look at the historical outline of diets, going back to caveman days, everything came from the earth, minimally processed, just cooked over fire and consumed. And teleologically, that's how our bodies have been programmed to take in nutrients in a very natural state and simplified way. Fast forward thousands of years, and around the Industrial Revolution time, we started manufacturing plants, and that went into the food industry, of course. So that was a major change in how we accessed and obtained food at a readily source and convenient source. And then you add on, the whole business aspect of rapidly produced, long shelf life foods. And that brings us to today's time where really that simple from the earth ingredients are now more processed, made to last forever, so added with chemicals, all the things that, our genetic disposition was not designed to consume.
So processed foods are a big topic, and it's something that we've actually covered on the podcast before, but can you talk a little bit about what that processing does to a food and sort of how it affects the nutrition profile of it?
So I'm going to first disclaimer, I'm not a food nutrition scientist, but just read the label. I mean, it really comes down to very simple behavioral and simple knowledge. Read the label. How many ingredients are in there and what are they? And the order in which they're printed is supposed to reflect the percentage of the content. So if your first ingredient is high fructose corn syrup, I mean, you know right there, that is highly processed food.
Right.
And if there are, I remember when I was a kid, there was, I think it was a commercial or some public educational message that if you can't actually pronounce the ingredients on the label, it's probably not something that you should consume, at least in high quantities. So simply put, you want to see very natural ingredients, very minimal or no chemical additives. And that's what is the most healthy for us to consume.
Sure. So in terms of good versus bad digestion, what would be some indicators what would be some, I guess, negative effects of eating a processed food versus a more whole or natural food?
Yeah, I think this is a really fascinating science of what's happening to our, what we call in medicine, the gut microbiome, right? So as we're introducing unnatural ingredients into the gut, it is changing the natural bacteria that should be there to allow proper digestion. And then other things too, medications and other chemical exposures. All of these are eroding these healthy state, balanced microbiota or different bacteria in our gut that really should be essential for natural ingredients, absorption of key nutrients. And then when we're changing this whole milieu of these bacteria, or even changing the lining of the gut so that the absorption is affected, then we're going to come up with other unwanted effects, chronic inflammation, nutrient deficiencies, et cetera. And then you add, certain disease states on top of that, and you really got this set up for havoc. The gut lining is really inward extension of our outward environment, if you think about it.
Yeah.
And in terms of surface area, it's certainly the largest surface area organ we have. So what you're doing to the gut lining is really important for the rest of the body.
Wow, I've never really thought about it that way. That it's the surface area and how much it's being exposed to what you're putting in your body. It's really almost, is it more than your skin?
Oh, definitely.
Wow.
Right.
I've never thought of that.
Yeah.
That's a very fun fact. So on the topic of nutrients, one big one you always hear about in regards to digestion would be fiber. Beyond the processed versus non-processed, what is the role of fiber sort of in your diet and digestion?
Well, it is one of the key macronutrients like anything else, and it should come balanced like anything else. I know there's a recent trend of fibermaxxing, et cetera. That's not healthy either. And if you think about, most science, behavioral science actually, anything that is excessive or extreme is probably going to have unwanted negative effects.
Right.
So yes, you do need an adequate amount of fiber daily. And that does affect absorption of other nutrients, not just the fiber, but what are you having with the fiber? For instance, in diabetes, we always say, you have to reduce your carbs because your body can't handle the glucose that's coming in. And how not only do you need to reduce the quantity of carbs, but the composition they're coming in with. So if you have a fruit, for example, that is simple sugars like watermelon. You have a slice of watermelon. It's all sugar and water. It's going to raise your blood sugar right through the roof. But if you have it with the fruit with the peel, like an apple, it has more fiber. So even though there's sugars in the apple, they will absorb more slowly and your body won't have these spikes. Same thing with other nutrients as well. You want to have a balance when you're eating a food and not a simple ingredient at high quantity.
Yeah. So even within a single food or ingredient, there can be a little bit more complex. There's balance even in one food. So an apple has those different components to it, as opposed to, like you said, a watermelon, which is really just one type of nutrient.
Because we're not eating the peel on a watermelon.
Right,
That's not very fun. But you can eat the peel of an apple, a pear, that it comes with fiber with it.
Okay.
Same thing with, any other meals that you have a plate of dinner. You want to have healthy fats.
Mm-hmm.
You want to have protein and not highly processed carbs, but natural carbs like those that come in vegetables. And that balance is the key to gut health. It's the key to metabolic health. And we try to focus on that with all our patients.
All right. I know you mentioned eating too much fiber as sort of that response to that recommendation to get more. Do you think people in general are getting enough fiber? I've always heard that it's something that people need to eat more of.
Well, I think our societal eating patterns are becoming so carb heavy, or have become, I should say, not becoming. They're very carb heavy. They're very processed. And when they're processed, they don't have a lot of natural fibers. So we do need to, as a society, reduce the carb intake, increase the fiber intake, increase the healthy lean protein intake. And you, I'm sure, know about the new food pyramid that was released just recently, changing up the compositions of our diet because of all of the metabolic chronic conditions like diabetes and high blood pressure and cholesterol and heart disease. So we have been in the last, I would say, several decades, maybe even 40 years, shifting towards more carb and less fiber and less healthy protein. So as a society, we need to. As an individual, though, it depends on, what other conditions you have and what are you replacing with by, fibermaxxing or doing something to an extreme. What are you lacking that you need? So you do have to have a little bit of individual guidance in there. But as a whole, we do need to eat more fiber. We do need to hydrate, but I'm not talking about those, 100-gallon Yetis.
Right.
That's also excessive, but adequate fiber and protein and hydration. And of course, activity. Activity is very important as well.
Yeah. That's funny you mentioned the hydration. I guess that's a perfect illustration of sort of taking the diet trend to an excess when you see someone carrying around a giant jug of water and it's like, should I be really drinking that much? Because it's a chore to get through all of that. And I think that the sort of the fibermaxxing you mentioned is another example of that. It's like, that's got to just be that's too much work.
If you feel like you're putting a lot of work into doing one of these dietary habits, it's probably too much. You shouldn't have to think that much about it. It shouldn't be on your mind every minute of the day. You should drink to thirst, and you should eat, when you sit down to eat, look at your plate, look at your food. Is this the best nutrition I can deliver to my body to perform at its best?
Yeah, you just look at it and visually see, like, is this really balanced, or am I just eating a giant bowl of mac and cheese for dinner and calling that good because I'm full?
Exactly. It's not a small thing to say convenience hasn't played a giant role,
of course,
in how we've changed our habits. Where especially the U.S. is a very busy society as a whole, right? I think historically other cultures have taken the time to focus on a diet, to focus, for instance, those that have the biggest meals in the middle of the day rather than the end of the day. Those societies tend to be healthier in terms of chronic metabolic conditions, at least, because eating your biggest meal at the end of the day and then going right to bed is probably the worst thing you can do for nutrient storage. Yeah,
I've kind of heard that advice generally, but I didn't know it was a actually a significant factor. How much does that really change at the time of day that you eat your food?
Well, so when you eat and go right to bed, what's going to happen to those calories? They're going to go right into you. When you go to sleep, you release a lot of endogenous hormones for sleep, for recovery, for storage, to be ready for the next day. And all of those hormones will drive these nutrients right into storage mode. Right? Just to put it simply, because that's what you're supposed to do in sleep. You're supposed to, the caveman had to make sure they conserve the calories, keep up, their tissues so that the next morning they can get up and do their day's work. But when you eat a large meal in the middle of the day, your largest meal in the middle of the day, that's when you're doing more activity after the meal and you're burning off excess calories instead of storing the excess calories. So you have more opportunity to be physiologic, so to speak.
Okay.
And, like in European societies where the dinner meal is really a light meal, and then they have the big, the city's shut down at lunchtime, you have a meal, you get a rest, and then pick up thereafter. That tends to be physiologically the healthiest way of meal patterns.
Yeah, and I think at least the sort of patterns that I'm used to is dinner ends up being your biggest meal of the day. I know a lot of people will have that's their family meal, or that's the only time that they're really able to think about having a meal, because you just grab lunch wherever. You may have a bagel
and I think
or a
that's,
banana for breakfast.
Unfortunately, that's how our society has structured itself. The 8 to 5 job, then you get home, and that's when you see your friends and family. And of course, those are important psychologically to have that meal time together. Whereas other societies have structured themselves as that shutdown in the middle of the day, go home, have that meal with your family at home, and then maybe go back to work and then do other things. So unfortunately, it's the byproduct of how we were scheduled. But still, within that, societal schedule, we can still choose to modify how we do things. Have an earlier dinner and go for a walk after dinner does, amazing things for making sure that your glucose doesn't get too high, for instance, and then also helps good sleep.
Yeah. That's really fascinating to me, because I guess for me personally, I always sort of pictured eating as you're just filling up your gas tank. I'm hungry, so I'm going to eat, and that's going to give me X calories, X carbs, and that's just going into my daily count. But I'd never really considered that your body processes it differently at different times, and depending on your activity level. It's not really like you're charging a battery. It's your body is using those nutrients immediately as they enter your body.
Correct. Is it using it immediately? Is it going into storage mode? As important as what the nutrients are? Because in the end, whether you're eating healthy or not, they're all calories, and the body has to decide what to do with those calories. Is it using it for activity, or is it using it for storage? And the behavioral patterns are what comes in that equation on what the body's going to do with the calories.
Wow, very interesting. And another topic that that you touched on is the societal aspect. You talked briefly about the European style of eating. What are other cultures sort of like in that way? Is that something that you could speak to as far as those eating habits, or even beyond that into the nutrition of their food and diets?
Yeah. So, of course, a lot of science and evidence has gone into different cultures and geographic regions and what they eat. And I think that, simply put, all of the evidence points towards, or a majority of the evidence points towards, a Mediterranean diet being probably the healthiest, even if you don't live in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, you always hear the Mediterranean diet come up in these health topics, and I've heard a lot of doctors mention it as well.
Yeah, because in that region, you're getting lean proteins through fish mostly, or seafood.
Yeah.
and they are not carb-heavy producers, rice in particular. So when you go to the South Asian countries and their big staple is rice, you see a lot of metabolic conditions there. So not having a lot of highly processed foods, not having simple carbs like rice, lots of bread is not part of their diet as well. And then leaning in on healthy fats like the olive oils, leaning in on lean proteins, fish being a big one, seems to be in the literature the most effective universally. It's of course, you have to look at your own medical conditions and what you can tolerate. But if you were to give a prescription for everybody, that's where you would probably focus. I think the Latin countries, they also have the behavioral pattern of big meals in the middle of the day and the siesta thereafter, right? So that's healthy. They do tend to lean a little bit more on their carb side, though. And it just depends on the history of your country and food production availability as in that area as well. But generally, I think that Mediterranean diet tends to do well in most studies, and most studies will concur that the Western diet is probably the worst.
Okay. I was going to say it doesn't seem like we're alone in this as far as having unhealthy diet patterns. I know that the Mediterranean diet stands out as an example of something that we should be doing, but some of these other regions are having similar issues with too many carbs.
And they've been infiltrated with the Western diet.
Right, of course.
McDonald's doesn't exist here alone.
Right.
And as soon as these food industries began capitalizing on these other regions of the world, they began developing the same issues. It's not a surprise. Similarly, when you have immigrants from these healthier countries and they come here and their next generation is having these issues at really accelerated rates than the original immigrants or their ancestors. And again, it's the environment, it's the behavior, it's a lot of things, not just one thing, but all of it coming together.
To change topics a little bit, I want to talk a bit about vitamins and minerals. So in addition to those macronutrients we talked about, what sort of impact do those have on your digestion?
Of course, they're as important as the macronutrients, right? Our body, our cells rely on certain elements to continue their normal function. And so it's important that we provide all of that. And when you have that balanced diet, it will come through those macronutrients as well. Usually not a need to supplement significantly. But, there are some with conditions where they may not be able to ingest all of the essentials they need. So a multivitamin is probably enough for anyone who thinks they're not getting their essential nutrients or minerals.
Okay. This may be getting a little into the weeds, but are there any examples of specific vitamins or minerals that aid in digestion or are something that have real notable benefit when you consume them, either through a supplement or just through a balanced diet?
I'm always with the balanced diet, of course. But, there are some anti-inflammatory ingredients.
Okay.
I'll give you an example. Turmeric is it has been studied and shown to have anti-inflammatory processes. But it's not like you would eat a teaspoon of turmeric necessarily. And there's many over the years that have had some benefits in specific ailments. But I think, again, it comes in that balanced diet. In terms of minerals, calcium is a key one, right? For metabolic bone health,
Right.
for other things. So, and then that depends on your age. Younger kids, growing skeletons should have adequate calcium. So that comes from dairy products most often, and then some green leafy vegetables and such, but you'll
Sure.
get it better in dairy products. And older women with osteoporosis should definitely have enough dietary calcium. So iron is another big one. This is something that we definitely know for our vegans who tend to be iron deficient
Right.
on a whole. So these are, I think, calcium, iron. These are things that are basic, and then you have the more advanced. What are anti-inflammatory ingredients that come in different foods that you could also focus on.
Okay, so like you said, it basically comes down to your balanced diet, and even some of these whole ingredients by themselves have health benefit outside of just striking that balance. And it's just things that you would normally include in a balanced meal.
Right.
Like turmeric is just a seasoning that
Yeah.
you can throw in there,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you may not even be thinking about it, but it's good for you to have, and it's not
and it's cultural too, those
Right.
kind of ingredients. But they probably, survived thousands of years of recipes because there was some benefit,
Right.
not just the taste for many of them.
You never know how these things got passed down and ended up. We liked this food and we kept eating it because it had an actual benefit, even if we didn't know about it. So,
Exactly. This evolution isn't by chance.
Right.
I think we have to give a lot of credit to our ancestors for developing these deep-rooted customs, practices, and cultures. Because if you look back, they get validated in many scientific ways now.
Is there any final advice that you would give people to sort of help improve their overall digestive health?
Well, I think, watch what you eat is really a key one. And you are what you eat. These are, phrases that come from hundreds of years ago, but they still hold true. Be careful what you're putting into your mouth, because it goes into your whole digestive tract, which then gets absorbed and goes into every other part of your body and affects the function of your body at the cellular level. So if you can look at your food and say, I'm happy with, these healthy ingredients, your body will be better for it and will function for you better for it. And it's not rocket science. If you're going to eat a donut, that's going to do something that you don't want. It's great at the taste receptors, but there's a price to pay thereafter.
Right.
And to think about that. And, early habits are really important, I feel. Getting
Definitely.
those children to understand, providing them the environment to eat healthy and the education to eat healthy will change our future generations. And that trajectory we mentioned will go down. It's not easy for everyone to do that. And in medicine, we try to, offer other medical options, obviously. We didn't even touch on weight loss and all the ways to do that with medical therapies.
Right.
But for those who have many challenges that can't just switch and eat healthy and exercise daily, there are options that will also improve their long-term health. But on the whole, just look at what you're eating, and are you happy with that going into your body? And waking up with, good energy the next day to do everything you want to do.
Yeah. So it seems like even with all of the advances in medicine and technology, and as society is sort of advanced, some things are really just time tested, and diet, I think, is one of those that's proven to be, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, don't try to take shortcuts, right? There's a price to pay. But I have great optimism that I think we're setting a new path, slow, but at least
a new old path, really.
And things like this are so important to get that public message out.
Of course.
And hopefully many of your listeners, if not all, have taken away something that they can implement today. That will make them much healthier for the rest of their lifetime.
Yeah, certainly. I'll have to consider more and think about some of these older meals and diets that I that might be a good decision to make. And beyond just the look at my plate and balance is like some of these things are
Yeah. I mean, how many trends
staple
in
for a reason.
diets have we had over the years?
Right.
Which ones have stuck? None.
Very few, none, possibly.
Because they're not doable. They're not, they're excessive in most cases. They come with their own baggage. What does stick for thousands of years is that fresh from the earth, minimally processed diet. So if you want to do that trend, you're going to be better for it.
All right. All right. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure. It's been great chatting with you.
So, Scott, you guys covered a lot there. What was your biggest takeaway?
I thought it was really interesting how a lot of these traditional cultural meals that have been passed down through generations have a lot of good nutrition in them, and they're sort of balanced on their own. And it makes you think about how those traditions got passed down and they intentionally or unintentionally were making and eating healthy food.
Yeah, it's almost like, you know what your body needs. And we still do as well. Like you kind of know when you're making a diet choice that's maybe not quite as good for you, like when you're going through the drive-through.
Right.
Instead of eating those leftovers sitting in the fridge. I did it the other night. I'm guilty of it. Had plenty of leftovers sitting there and I decided to order some Buffalo Wild Wings instead.
Yeah.
But to your point, then you take a look at sort of what has been passed down, and the stuff passed down is all pretty healthy. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. Even our diets, like we tried to evolve in the right way.
Yeah. Maybe we were moving too fast and thinking too much about convenience and cost rather than the actual health of it. And maybe some of these people were collectively listening to their bodies when they were making this food, and that's how they ended up on these meals.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's well said. I think one of the really interesting things that she said that stuck with me, and I wrote it down, so I'm gonna read it. She said that eating your biggest meal at the end of the day and going right to bed is the worst thing you can do for nutrient storage, which really stuck with me because I kind of always think about eating too close to bed as like, ooh, I'm gonna wake up later or something. It revs my body up. I've never thought about how it's gonna affect like what my body's doing with the nutrients and how it's digesting them. Certainly don't want them to be storing things that I don't want them to be storing, stuff like that. My dinner is definitely the biggest meal of the day.
Oh, absolutely.
Hands down. And then I go sit on the couch for 2 or 3 hours and then I go to bed.
Yes.
I'm sure I'm not alone in that. So I think I like that she mentioned that. I think a good first step maybe is the walk after dinner, like she recommended. But I don't know, I can see a world where I might try to make the shift where lunch is my bigger meal. Still, cooking dinner at night, just eating less of a portion for dinner and then saving more leftovers so you can have this like convenient lunch that's healthy and is healthy and it's a big meal. It's just waiting for you.
Yeah, meal prepping lunch is something I've always considered largely just for saving money and not spending $20 on lunch every time I'd step out the door. But I think there's actually a really good health benefit to it, even if it isn't a salad. Your timing of your food is actually really impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a well-balanced meal at the right time. Sounds like it's kind of the better thing to be doing for your body than worrying about like, oh, let me have this salad instead of McDonald's 30 minutes before I go to bed. So I thought that was really cool. A really practical tip that I could probably implement over the next couple of weeks and just build into my schedule. So I was excited about that. Well, that's going to do it for us this time on Health with Houston Methodist. Be sure to share, like, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We drop new episodes on Tuesday mornings. So until then, stay tuned and stay healthy.